The air was still enough to hear the flutter of the flag overhead. No wind, no whispers, just the echo of boots on white stone and the weight of history, pressing down on everyone, gathered at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Then they appeared, 5 figures in black masks, slipped from the crowd like shadows breaking loose. They didn't walk with reverence, they strode fast, sharp, cutting through the line of tourists who gasped and parted instinctively. One carried a megaphone, another clenched a rolled banner in his fist, and all 5 wore heavy boots that clattered like gunshots on the marble dot at the center of the plaza. The tomb guard did not flinch. He stood exactly where he had stood for the last hour, rifle shouldered, eyes locked straight ahead, body carved from discipline. The world could have been burning around him, and he would not have moved. That was his duty, but now the world was testing him. The crowd froze, phones lifted, children clung to their parents' legs. Even the pigeons seemed to pause mid-step, watching the lead masked man raise his megaphone. "This ceremony is a lie," he barked, his voice cracking across the sacred ground. The words slammed against the stillness like a hammer striking glass. The guard did not blink. Step by step, the intruders advanced, fanning out, circling closer like wolves around a lone sentinel. The banner unfurled, dark red cloth slashed with spray-painted slogans, and the man with the megaphone screamed again. Closer now, his spit catching the sunlight. Not a muscle twitched on the guard's face. He had been trained for storms, for screams, for chaos. He had marched through the memory of war and carried the weight of silence across continents. He knew this moment wasn't about strength. It was about resolve. And still, the crowd thought he would move. They thought he would break, or call for help, or step back just once. He didn't. The 5 masked men were almost upon him now, just feet away. The marble rang with their boots. Cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "Do something," their voice trembling. The guard's jaw tightened, his eyes, hidden behind the glint of the afternoon sun, locked forward, not on them, but through them. And in that single heartbeat, something shifted in the air. The tension snapped like a drawn bowstring released. No one could explain it later, but everyone there felt it. The crowd thought he would step aside, but in the next moment, the world saw what honor truly means. Long before he stood at the tomb, he had been a boy staring at folded flags. He was 19 when the war took his best friend, Private First Class Daniel Cole, a laugh that cracked through the desert heat, a voice that always said, "We'll make it back." Only one of them did. The day the letter came, he remembered his mother dropping the casserole dish. It shattered across the tile as the words sank in, "Killed in action," and his own breath locked in his chest like rusted gears. At the funeral, he stood stiff as the rifles cracked their farewell, staring at the flag-draped coffin as if he could will it to open. It never did. He didn't cry. Not then. Not when he packed Daniel's boots into a box. Not when he replayed their last conversation over and over, looking for the warning he missed. The tears waited years, trapped like a mine buried deep, until one day they finally broke loose. Standing in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier, it was his first visit to Arlington. He'd expected stone and silence. Instead, he felt presence, an ocean of voices that said nothing, yet echoed everything. The guard walked past him then, rifle balanced like a metronome of eternity. And in that moment, something inside him decided that he would stand here one day. For Daniel, for all of them, the journey was brutal. Months of relentless training shaved every loose edge from him, every slouch, every stray blink, every flicker of doubt. He rose at 4 a.m., ran until his vision blurred, drilled until the soles of his feet bled. He memorized 21 steps, 21 seconds, 21 paces, until the rhythm was carved into his bones. He learned to stand as storms cracked around him, as tourists whispered, as grief clawed at his ribs. He became stillness. He became silence. And now on this bright autumn afternoon he was here, guarding the tomb where no name was written, where all names rested. Daniel's memory lived in the glint of his polished shoes, in the faint clink of his medals when the wind shifted. He hadn't spoken a word in hours. He wouldn't speak another all day, but not everyone saw it as sacred. The 5 masked men had been planning this for weeks. Their leader called himself Vex, a former city councilman turned agitator. He'd built a small but vicious following by crashing public ceremonies with chaotic protests. He thrived on spectacle, feeding off the glare of cameras. Every viral clip brought him more attention, more donations, more chances to sneer at the idea of honor. Vex hated symbols, especially military ones. Tradition is just old chains, he told his crew in a dim warehouse days before the attack. They sat around a battered table, plotting. A stolen layout of the memorial grounds lay beneath their hands, stained with energy drink rings. "We don't touch him," one of the younger men had said. nervous, just noise, just signs. Vex's eyes glittered through the shadows of his hood. Noise becomes power, he said. And power makes them kneel. They studied the guard rotations, the tourist schedule, even the patterns of the pigeons. They knew exactly when the plaza would be full enough to capture global headlines. And they wore masks not to hide, but to brand themselves. Like villains from some twisted pageant. That morning, the guard's commander had paused by him before the watch began. A seasoned colonel with silver at his temples. He'd spoken quietly. Stay sharp. They've been making noise online. The guard had simply nodded. He didn't need a warning. He had seen men come with anger in their eyes before. They always came thinking silence meant weakness. They never understood that silence was forged from fire. By noon, the crowd around the tomb had swelled schoolchildren on field trips, tourists fanning themselves, veterans standing with hands over hearts. The sun flashed off polished stone and gilded medals. Every 21 steps, the guard pivoted, heels clicking with mechanical grace, rifle snapping to his shoulder with a precision older than he was. When his watch reached its midpoint, he turned, and his eyes brushed the rows of white markers that stretched toward the horizon. He thought of Daniel, of the letter, of the boy who promised they'd both come home, and he promised, silently, again, I'll stand for you. Always. At the far edge of the crowd, the 5 masked men were waiting. Their eyes were restless above black cloth, their boots planted like coiled springs. Vex gripped his megaphone, feeling the pulse of adrenaline rising. He wasn't here to make a point, he was here to shatter one. Beside him, the youngest of the group, barely 20, with trembling hands, looked unsure. What if they stop us? He murmured. They can't stop what's already begun, Vex said, a grin crawling beneath his mask. They think silence protects them. Today, we'll prove silence can bleed. He checked the time. Right on schedule. Back at the center, the guard shifted the rifle on his shoulder. A faint breeze whispered across the plaza, stirring the flag. Somewhere behind him, a school bell chimed noon. He did not know their names. He did not see their masks yet, but something in his gut coiled an instinct sharpened by years of patrols and midnight ambushes. The kind that once saved his life. The kind that told him, a storm is coming, and this time, he would face it not with bullets, but with absolute stillness. The crowd didn't notice them at first. 5 shapes drifting from the fringe, slipping between stroller wheels and camera straps like oil on water. The afternoon sun flashed off their black masks, boots thudded and synced. They moved like they'd practiced it because they had. The first hint of trouble was a child's voice. Mum, why are they wearing masks? Heads turned, eyes narrowed, phones lifted, subtle at first, then bold. The murmurs rose like steam. The guard heard nothing. He stood at the far end of his measured walk, spine iron straight, rifle balanced on his shoulder, eyes locked forward at the eternal marble resting place. His heartbeat didn't change. It hadn't changed in an hour. He was not here to react. He was here to endure. But endurance was about to be tested. Vex was the first to break the invisible barrier. He strode out into the ceremonial space as if he owned it, the megaphone swinging at his side. The others fanned behind him, forming a jagged crescent. The youngest, twitching with nerves, kept glancing at the rifles of the nearby security personnel who had already noticed but hadn't moved yet, unsure how close to let this get before intervening. Vex stopped 10 paces from the guard and raised the megaphone. This is a show, he roared, his voice blasting against the marble like a cat. The sound echoed through the silence, startling a flock of pigeons into flight. The guard's face did not move. You stand here like a statue while the world burns, Vex shouted again. This is not honor, this is obedience. Tourists gasped. A veteran near the front shook his head sharply, lips pressed into a thin line. A reporter's camera zoomed in, the lens trembling slightly. Still, the guard didn't blink. He simply continued his slow turn, heel snapping, rifle shifting to the opposite shoulder, as if Vex were just another shadow on the plaza. The precision was unnerving. It made the shouting seem small. Vex hated that. He slammed his boot down. Look at me. The megaphone cracked from the force of his grip. The guard's eyes didn't even flicker. Coward, Vex hissed under his breath. The other 4 joined in. One unfurled the blood-red banner, its spray-painted words slashing the air. The dead can't hear you. Another clanged 2 metal rods together in a harsh rhythm meant to shatter the silence. The sound was offbeat, designed to pierce. Children flinched. A baby began to cry. A pair of veterans stepped forward from the crowd, then stopped, fists clenched. Choosing to trust the guard's composure, he remained unmoved. His face was carved from stone, yet behind it lived years of fire. He remembered rockets screaming through desert skies, remembered clenching Daniel's bloody dog tags, remembered nights when silence was not peace, but punishment, and he remembered what he'd sworn at this very place. You will not move unless your post is relieved. That oath weighed more than the noise ever could. Vex sensed the tension rising in the onlookers and leaned into it. This place is a tomb of lies, he snarled, voice cracking with venom. They bury strangers here and pretend they mattered. They train puppets to walk in circles and call it glory. Gasps rippled. A young girl buried her face in her father's coat. A grizzled Marine vet muttered, "He doesn't know where he is." The guard reached the end of his 21 steps, turned with mechanical exactness, and resumed clack 1, 2, 3. Each step landed like a heartbeat. The defiance of stillness thundered louder than their screams. Vex hated being invisible. He dropped to his knees and slammed his palms on the marble. "Do you feel anything? Or did they train it out of you?" He banged his fists again. Boom, boom, boom. His voice fractured. Spittle flew. The megaphone screeched with feedback. The guard pivoted again. Not a flicker. Reporters were openly filming now, cameras circling like vultures. The crowd was split, some jeering the intruders, others pleading for them to leave before things got worse. A security officer's hand hovered near his radio. Still, they waited. There was protocol. The guard hadn't moved, hadn't signaled, and that mattered because if he broke, the tradition broke with him. The youngest masked man faltered. "Maybe we should," he whispered. "Shut up," Vex snapped, not looking at him. His eyes were locked on the guard like daggers. "He's cracking. I can see it." He couldn't. The guard's gaze was still forward, steady as the pillars, but inside, beneath the layers of stillness, the guard felt a familiar flicker of heat, the same quiet fury he'd felt the day Daniel died, the same fire that drove him through every punishing drill. They thought silence meant numbness. They didn't understand silence could be strength under perfect control, and he would not surrender that control. The masked men closed in another step. Now just 6 feet away, they stomped in unison, boots hammering like war drums. The banner whipped the air. The megaphone roared with distortion. The marble plaza became a clash of echoes and defiance. Yet over it all was the soft, measured clack, clack, clack of the guard's steps, deliberate, timeless, untouchable. He passed within feet of them, turned and marched back, every motion perfect, and something strange began to happen. The louder they got, the quieter the crowd became, as if instinctively, everyone wanted to hear, not the noise, but the silence fighting it. An old man in a faded army cap whispered, "Hold, soldier, just hold." A schoolteacher placed her hand over her heart. A veteran wiped at his eyes. The guard didn't see them, didn't hear them, but he felt them, like a current, warm and steady, rising behind him. Vex was unraveling. He had come to break a statue. Instead, he was screaming at a storm that would not bend. "You're a slave in a toy uniform," he howled, lunging forward. His boots skidded on the marble as he swung the banner pole inches from the guard's face, trying to draw any reaction, any blink, any twitch, any sign he'd won. There was nothing. The guard's eyes stayed locked forward, through Vex, past him, beyond him at something only he could see. Maybe Daniel, maybe eternity. The crowd's mood flipped. Where there had been fear, there was now anger, sharp, protective anger. Veterans muttered curses. Parents pulled children close. Even the reporters stopped narrating and simply watched wide-eyed. The security officers shifted their stance, waiting. One of them spoke quietly into his mic. "If he breaks the line, we move." Vex spun on the crowd. "You cheer a machine," he shouted, gesturing wildly. A man who gave his soul for nothing. But the words fell flat. The crowd was no longer looking at Vex. They were looking at the guard, and in the reflection of his polished shoes, they saw everything Vex had lost. The youngest masked man's hands were shaking. "I don't want to do this anymore," he whispered. His voice cracked. Vex ignored him. "This ends when he blinks," Vex hissed. "And he will." But deep down, even as he spat the words, Vex was starting to doubt, because something about the guard's stillness felt unbreakable, not rigid, not frozen, alive, rooted, as if he wasn't ignoring them, as if he was enduring them. The guard pivoted one last time, rifle snapping with perfect precision. Clack. The sound sliced the plaza in half. The 5 men stood within arm's reach, now ringed around him like vultures. Every phone was recording. Every breath was held one more step, and they would cross the line, and the guard who had endured war, loss, fire, grief and the chaos of this entire plaza stood taller. His silence roared louder than all their screaming. The plaza was a held breath. No one shifted. No one spoke. Even the birds had vanished from the marble arches above. Only two forces existed now, the stillness of the guard, and the chaos pressing against it. The 5 masked men loomed close. Boots squealing on polished stone, banner snapping in angry arcs. Their shadows stretched across the ceremonial path shadows, where no one was supposed to stand. The crowd had pulled back in a ring, as if instinct warned them. This was about to change everything, and it did. Vex stepped over the invisible threshold, just half a step. But it was everything. His boot landed squarely on the guard's sacred 21-step path. Gasps shot like electric sparks through the crowd. One mother whispered, "No, no, don't," and pulled her child back. The guard was his heel clicked the marble. His rifle was tight to his shoulder. His eyes stared through eternity. He did not break rhythm, not yet, but something in the air changed sharp, metallic, like the snap of a tripwire. "Got you," Vex breathed. Grinning behind his mask, he planted himself directly in the guard's path. "I'm here," he hissed. "Now what?" The guard marched closer. 1 step, 2. His expression never shifted, but in the depth of his still eyes, something ancient stirred, something forged in desert heat and loss and bone-deep discipline. He had faced rockets. He had faced silence that lasted for years. This was just noise, but this noise had crossed the line, and there was only one rule. The line must be protected. Vex spread his arms wide. "Do it," he sneered. "Push me. Break your perfect doll routine." He leaned closer. Blink. The guard's boot struck the marble with surgical precision 3 inches from Vex's toes. Then, suddenly crack, the guard's rifle butt slammed from his shoulder to his hands with mechanical speed, snapping into the port arms position. The sudden motion split the air like lightning. The sound hit harder than a gunshot. The crowd gasped as one. A child squealed. Vex flinched backward on instinct, and for the first time, the guard spoke. His voice was low, controlled, and it carried like thunder across the plaza. "Halt." Everything froze. Even the masked men went still, as if their muscles had been seized. The word rang through the space, vibrating off the marble. It wasn't shouted, but it cut deeper than any scream. "Halt," the guard repeated, voice sharp as a blade. "Step back, immediately." Protocol, exact words, burned into his training. He had never imagined using them here, but he spoke them like law itself. And somehow, they were. Vex's breath hitched behind the mask. The guard took one exact pace forward, eyes locked on him, now truly locked, like a predator tracking prey. The sudden focus was terrifying, like watching a statue awaken with fire in its eyes. I said, "Halt." This time the command cracked like stone splitting in winter. The 4 others staggered back a step. The banner drooped. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Vex alone stood rooted, too proud or too afraid to move. "You can't touch me," he said, though his voice trembled. The guard's reply was silence, and motion. In one flawless maneuver, the guard pivoted left, then right, cutting the air with the rifle's steel barrel. The movement was so fast it blurred. The muzzle stopped inches from Vex's chest, not touching, not striking, but claiming space, claiming the line. The gesture was pure discipline, pure warning. It was the same move he had drilled thousands of times, meant to signal absolute control without violence, and somehow, it was more frightening than any strike. Vex's bravado cracked. He stumbled half a step back. Security finally surged forward, but the guard raised his left hand in a subtle, razor-sharp signal. Not yet. Protocol. He had initiated the challenge. He would finish it. He stomped once, rifle slamming back to his shoulder. The echo thundered like a drum roll. "You will step off this path," he commanded. No scream, no fury, only authority. The words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of Arlington, of generations, of everything this space meant. And that weight crushed Vex. His hands shook. The crowd's phones caught the tremor. His fellow masked men were already edging backward, masks trembling. One of them hissed, "Vex, stop, please." Vex's breath came ragged. Sweat slid down beneath his mask. He had come to shatter something unfeeling, but what stood before him wasn't unfeeling, it was unyielding. The guard took one final step now. Their faces were inches apart. Vex could see the flecks of dust on the guard's gleaming insignia, smell the faint tang of gun oil. The guard's eyes were ice, but beneath the ice there was fire, the quiet, terrible kind that burns forever. The world held its breath. Then the guard spoke the last words. Vex would hear as an opponent, "Leave this ground." The spell broke. Vex's knees gave slightly. His fingers twitched. The megaphone slipped from his grip and clattered to the marble with a hollow clang that echoed like defeat. The youngest masked man bolted first, sprinting back into the crowd. The others followed, peeling away like crows scattered by lightning. Vex stood alone, trembling, the banner slack in his hands. His voice was gone. The guard didn't move, not a muscle, as Vex's shoulders finally sagged. And then, without a word, Vex turned and walked. 30 seconds. That was all it had taken from the moment the guard moved. 30 seconds of controlled fire that shattered their chaos. Gasps became cheers. The veterans saluted instinctively. A child whispered, "He won without fighting." The guard did not acknowledge them. He pivoted cleanly, placed his rifle back to shoulder, and resumed his 21 steps as if nothing had happened. Click, clack, click, clack, dot, as if order had swallowed chaos whole, and maybe it had. The 5 masked men froze in place as the guard's command sliced through the silence like a blade. "Stand down." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even loud, but the weight of the words carried through the marble courtyard, bouncing off the solemn stone walls of the tomb behind him. The leader of the masked men, broad-shouldered, with a black scarf wrapped tight around his face, staggered back half a step, like he'd been struck without a hand ever touching him. The shoving, the mocking, the encroaching chaos they had tried to summon, all of it collapsed in an instant. For the first time, the onlookers could see their hands. They were trembling. A dozen uniformed soldiers, previously standing at ease along the periphery, had shifted. The guard hadn't called them, he hadn't gestured, but his act of defiance, silent, controlled, was like a signal flaring in the dark. Boots thudded in unison. A ring of military police formed behind the crowd, cutting off the men's retreat. The reporters' cameras pivoted wildly, lenses locking on the sudden tightening perimeter. The leader's eyes darted to each side. He had planned for resistance. He had not planned for unity. The guard lowered his rifle from ceremonial shoulder rest to port arms. The movement was so precise, so clean, that it felt like an execution of justice rather than an act of force. And in that moment, one small sound cracked the tension. The youngest masked man, barely more than a teenager, dropped his metal baton. It clanged on the stone and rolled away like a fleeing insect. "Identify yourselves," one of the arriving military officers demanded, voice clipped, professional. None of the 5 spoke. Their courage was bleeding out of them like air from a punctured tire. The guard stepped forward, not lunging, not threatening, just one deliberate step. The entire crowd instinctively pulled back. He raised his right hand, palm outward, stopping the officer mid-stride. "They will not move again," the guard said simply, and they didn't. Not when the officers advanced. Not when the zip ties bit into their wrists. Not even when their masks were pulled away, revealing faces pale with fear and streaked with sweat. The leader's scarf fell last. The cameras caught the moment his eyes closed, lips trembling. The exact second arrogance turned to surrender. The guard did not watch them being marched off. He turned, pivoting perfectly on his heel, rifle snapping back into its ceremonial cradle as if nothing had happened. As if 5 armed intruders hadn't just stood inches from desecrating sacred ground. He took exactly 3 paces back to his post. He faced the tomb, and then, with a precision that seemed carved from time itself, he resumed his silent vigil. Gasps gave way to stunned applause. Not cheers, no one dared break the sacred hush too loudly, but the sound of palms meeting in hesitant, reverent rhythm. The cameras kept flashing. The footage was already spreading online, broadcast to millions who would see not chaos, but control. They would see a single guard, outnumbered and unflinching. And they would see 5 masked men, once bold, now broken, led away like shadows dissolving in daylight. The courtyard was quiet again. The chaos had been swept away like a storm tide receding from the shore, leaving only silence and solemn stone in its wake. The crowd that had gathered still lingered, unsure if they were permitted to breathe normally yet. It felt like they were standing inside history, as if the air itself had recorded what had just taken place. The guard hadn't moved, not an inch. His shoulders were square, his chin lifted, his gaze fixed on the tomb. The gleaming rifle rested perfectly against his shoulder once more. He stood as though the confrontation had never existed at all, as though he had been carved from the same cold granite that surrounded him. But around him, the world was still shifting in the aftermath. A small child stood near the rope barrier, clutching a folded pamphlet from the memorial. His father knelt beside him, still stunned, still holding his phone at his side without realizing it was still recording. "Daddy," the boy whispered, eyes wide. "Is he a hero?" His father swallowed. His throat bobbed, dry and tight. He glanced at the guard, then back to his son. "Yes," he said softly. "He is." The boy nodded, then straightened, standing taller, as if some invisible thread had tied him to the same spine of honor the guard carried. The father reached over and stopped the recording, not wanting to cheapen the moment by turning it into content. Some things, he realized, deserved to stay sacred, not far away. A high-ranking colonel stepped out from the ranks of uniformed officers who had secured the scene. His chest bore rows of campaign ribbons, his posture rigid despite his years. He approached the guard's post, boots clicking on the marble with deliberate gravity. When he reached the edge of the black mat, he stopped. For a long moment, he simply stood there, eyes narrowed slightly, like he was studying a relic of something nearly lost. Then he raised his hand in a crisp, unwavering salute. It was not casual. It was not perfunctory. It was the kind of salute one soldier gives another only when words are too small. And still, the guard did not move, not even to acknowledge it. The colonel lowered his hand, lips pressed into the faintest of smiles, then turned and walked away. It was enough. They both knew it. Inside the guard's mind, beneath the flawless mask of discipline, thoughts flickered like distant lanterns. He remembered his friend Daniel, the one who never came home from the desert. He remembered standing in the rain at the funeral, the folded flag heavy in his trembling hands. He remembered the vow he made that day, staring at the cold earth. If I can't save them, I will honor them. And he thought about the tiny dog tag that still rested inside his breast pocket, worn smooth from years of rubbing it with his thumb during midnight watches. It was there now, close to his heart, a silent weight that reminded him why he stood here, and why he could never yield. His breathing was steady. His pulse.com. No triumph burned in him, only duty. They had come to provoke him. He had answered with stillness. They had come to shatter silence. He had made the silence unbreakable. Beyond the rope line, people began drifting away, voices hushed, footsteps careful, not because anyone had ordered them to be quiet, but because reverence had bloomed there, unspoken and undeniable. And in the center of that growing emptiness, the guard stood alone, perfectly still, exactly as he had before. Exactly as he would, until his watch was done. Long after the crowd had gone, the courtyard remained still, bathed in the golden hush of the setting sun. The marble stones glowed faintly, and the air felt heavier, as if the weight of what had happened lingered there like a sacred echo. The footage was already racing across the world. On phones and televisions, in living rooms and classrooms, millions were watching the same impossible moment. 5 masked men advancing, and one guard refusing to yield. No punches, no shouts, no theatrics. Just stillness. And somehow that stillness had shattered their defiance more completely than force ever could. People would try to explain it, of course. Analysts would talk about discipline, training, military precision. Commentators would debate motives and security lapses. Politicians would craft speeches to ride the wave of public awe, but those who had been there knew better. They knew it wasn't about technique, it was about honor. Honor isn't loud, it doesn't posture or boast. It stands, even when standing feels impossible. It endures, it sacrifices, it waits. And on that day, one lone guard proved that honor can still silence chaos without ever raising his voice. As darkness slowly crept over the memorial grounds, the guard remained at his post, unblinking, unshaken. His shadow stretched long across the stone, like a bridge between the living and the fallen. He would not speak about what happened. He would not seek credit, or fame, or headline. That was not why he stood there. He stood because others no longer could, and because some things, some values, some vows are worth more than fear, more than pride, more than even life itself. Tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength, and sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is not move at all. If this story moved you, share it. Let others remember what honor truly means. Subscribe for more untold legacies, and help keep their silence alive.